Morning. Audio okay? All right, well, good. Good to see everybody this morning. Happy Sunday. Beautiful weather. I'm glad that the heat broke a little bit cooler, which is nice for me. I enjoy the cooler weather being from Minnesota, so the heat is a little bit too much for me sometimes. So today I wanted to continue with, I guess, my discussions on the Mountains and Waters Sutra, which has been really helping me prepare for a course that I'll be teaching in January. And so there's a lot to this, more than meets the eye, and so in reading this book, The Mountains and Waters Sutra by Shohaku Okamura, I've gotten a chance to really dive into this and start to penetrate the text. And there's one paragraph from the Mountains and Waters Sutra, which isn't a regular sutra, by the way. It's really a fascicle. I always get the chapter in the Shobogenzo. So it's not an actual sutra like you would think of as being like the Heart Sutra or something like that, but it's one of the chapters in Shobogenzo. And so, so there's one paragraph that really stood out to me. I started studying this text about 6-7 months ago, something like that. And of course, I read through the chapter, at first. And even like the first or second time that I read it, this specific paragraph really jumped out at me. It's like one of those intellectual stimulators. It tickled my intellect, and so I just found it very, very fascinating. So I'll read the paragraph to begin with. And by the way, in doing the research for this talk and for the course in general, this is a matter of using Shohaku Okamura's translation of the Mountains and Waters Sutra. And of course, he is taking this from Dogen's Shobogenzo. And so it's interesting to see how the translations come through. So Shohaku Okamura is a practitioner that, studied in Japan for a while and came to the United States and has been teaching here for a number of years. And his teacher was Uchiyama Roshi. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I believe that's the case. I'm confident that's the case. And so it's interesting to see how the interpretations of these core texts come through each teacher. And so in my case, I've been practicing here at Dharma Field for a number of years. And so we have a certain way of talking about things here. And so in trying to talk about what's being pointed out here, it's almost like there's from Dogen to Okamura, there's a translation, and that's an actual language translation. And then there's a translation that happens when I read the text from Okamura. So it's like, even though it's translated into English, it's still like there's another layer of translation, which is like trying to really understand what Okamura is pointing out in Dogen's text. And so it's just, I wanted to give you that insight to the layers of, translations that happen when talking about these texts. And so what I did with this is I went through and first you're going to hear the original text from Dogen, and then you're going to hear some of Okamura's translation of the text. Well, what I felt like I needed to do was sort of change some of the words that were being used in the translation to help really bring out what I can see is being pointed to in this text. Does that make sense? So I did change some of the wording of Okamura's commentary. just to be helpful when in talking about that stuff, to bring out what I think this is being pointed out in the text. So here's the paragraph. The stone woman gives birth to a child in the night. This means that the time when a stone woman gives birth to a child is the night. There are male stones, female stones, and stones neither male nor female. They repair heaven and they repair earth. There are stones of heaven and there are stones of earth. Though it is said in the secular world, it is rarely understood. We should understand the reason behind this giving birth to a child. At the time of birth, our parent and child transform together. We should not only study that birth is realized in the child becoming the parent, we should also study and fully understand that the practice and verification of birth is realized when the parent becomes the child. There's a lot there, and I think there's more than meets the eye, typical of Dogen. So right away, when the first line of this paragraph is the stone woman gives birth to a child in the night. And what comes to mind when we think of a stone woman? It's a statue, right? We think of stone as being lifeless, immovable. And what's being said here is that the stone woman actually gives birth to a child in the night. And so right away, Dogen is challenging our common everyday understanding, which if you've practiced Zen enough, you'll know that that's part of the deal here, and it's necessary. It's necessary for our common everyday usual understanding of things to be sort of challenged in a way, because how we view the world that we live in is almost concrete. We view things commonly in terms of substantiality. So we have, and in the work that I do, we use the word concrete thinking. Somebody has concrete thinking, meaning they take things at face value. They don't question, what's being said. And so maybe there's an inability to look beyond the surface level interpretation of the words that are being said, and so human beings, that's commonly what we do, is we interpret the experience that we have in terms of substantiality, and we think things are real and exist and are substantial. And so every time with Dogen, he uses words that are going to challenge our common way of viewing things and our common interpretation. And this is absolutely necessary, because we need to loosen up our grip on how we, kind of put things into packages and conceptualize. And so here the stone woman is obviously not lifeless or immovable if she can give birth. And the stone woman is actually from the Song of Jewel Mere Awareness. And this is on our website. It's a text. And so what I'll do is bring out what from the Song of Jewel Mere Awareness it says. And so it goes, when the wooden man begins to sing, the stone woman gets up to dance. It's not within reach of feeling or discrimination. How could it admit of consideration and thought? So here the wooden man is singing, the stone woman is dancing, and it's not within reach of feeling or discrimination. And how could it admit of consideration of thought? In this case, the wooden stone tells us that the wooden man and the stone woman are not confused by human sentiment. They are free from human feeling and discriminating mind. Without being moved by such things, the wooden man and stone woman freely sing and dance, living vigorously. I don't know about that word vigorously, but that's what Okamura said in his book. So basically, the stone woman, what it's pointing out here is that the stone woman is not hindered by delusion, and can therefore act freely. So not caught by human feeling, by human sentiment. And this is really natural action versus willed action. Natural action, I didn't get a chance to really look up how we use that here, but coming from the whole. Action that's coming from the whole and not a divided our interpretation of reality. So this is action coming out of the whole versus our common way of doing things, which is willed. You know, typically we have a framework of how the world is, and then we interpret experiences and we act according to how we interpret those experiences and how we should act. And we're typically drug around by our emotions and our thoughts, you know. And in the work that I do, again, I use cognitive behavioral therapy a lot, which is how thinking influences emotions and how thinking and emotions influences the actions that we take. And this is very helpful to point out to people how thinking really does influence the actions that we take. Sorry, I have kind of a dry mouth. Early on when I was getting introduced or acquainted with these teachings and started to gain a little bit of insight as far as what was being pointed out here, it was very apparent this natural action versus willed action idea. And I started to notice a lot more than I had previously. And even from a young age, I can remember this standing out to me quite a bit. But it's like if you look at puppies, you know, if you look at animals, you know, it's almost like even before encountering these teachings, I had sort of an envy, you know, of animals because they're not hindered by all of the stuff that I seem to be going through. From a young age, I remember being just pulled into my emotional state. You know, I would just get really impacted by emotions. And of course, thinking was a huge part of that. And so I just had a lot of, there was a lot of suffering that was apparent to me generated by my thinking and how I was feeling. But when I looked at puppies, for example, or dogs, they just do what they want to do. They just act, you know, according to what they want at that moment, you know, and they're not hindered by this overthinking. And so I think we can see that in nature where there just seems to be a freedom that exists with acting freely and not being drug around by thinking and emotions and the human, you know, sort of interpretation of the experience. And of course, you know, storms happen, things pass away, all that still goes on, but it's a different sort of, you know, at least how it seems. There's a different kind of, it's different, you know. And I think this is what the difference is there's not a willed action. If a dog is hungry and it sees a dead bird, it's probably going to go up and try to start to eat it, you know. But there isn't like a maliciousness behind that, you know, as there seem to be with human beings. And so the stone woman isn't moved by feeling or discriminating mind. And Okamura, in his commentary on this, uses the word moved, isn't moved by feeling or discriminating mind. And I was going to use a different word, but the more I looked at it, it's like, well, first of all, I can't find anything better. And the more I started to really appreciate that word moved, because I think that's pretty accurate. Like we're impacted, we're moved by thinking and feeling, by discriminating mind. And so we get impacted by this in a pretty significant way. But the stone woman is not, she's free from that. The stone woman is just able to act freely in accordance with totality, wholeness, and not be pulled around by this discriminating mind. And I might get into this a little bit later. Does that mean she does or does not have a discriminating mind? Well, first of all, it wouldn't be hers in particular to begin with, but she's not caught by that discrimination. She doesn't see separation. And so this means that the time when a stone woman gives birth to a child is the night. And this is back to the original paragraph here. So the night is the same as darkness in Sandakai, or merging of difference in unity. And this is a poem written by Shito. And again, this is on the Dharma Field website. He writes, the branching streams flow in the darkness. This darkness or night means the realm beyond discrimination. Both stone woman and the night refer to absolute reality beyond discrimination and the relative world. So here, night and darkness is referring to the absolute. We talk about two truths, relative and absolute. And with absolute, so night is absolute, it's darkness. And if you think about that, in the night, we when it's completely dark, we can't see distinctions. You don't see distinctions. And so that's really, I think, a good way to put absolute. So there aren't distinctions in the night. And I'm looking at the time here, and to be honest with you, I don't know if I'm going to get through this whole thing. You know, I have 4 pages here. There's just a lot to these passages by Dogen. So I apologize. I will try to leave room for some questions at the end. In Branching Streams Flow in the Darkness, this is a book written by Suzuki. He uses Japanese words ri and ji to point out night, day and night, which I actually found to be helpful because it pulls out some nuances about this that I don't think the English language quite captures. And so the true source, ri, this is absolute, is beyond our thinking. It is pure and stainless. When you describe it, you put a limitation on it. So again, when you describe it, you put a limitation on it. And when I read that, this is in our the precepts. Not speaking a single word is right speech. So not speaking a single word is right speech. Anything we say misses the mark. So we literally cannot put the truth into words. And then he goes on, that is, you stay in the truth or put a mark on it. In the Heart Sutra, it says, no color, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no objects of mind, and so forth. That is ri. And so back to the commentary here, the merging of difference and unity. This is from Sandakai. Within light, there is darkness, but don't take it as darkness. Within darkness, there is light, but don't take it as light. Light and dark are relative to one another, like forward and backward steps. So G refers to the phenomenal. So I said it's ri and G, light and dark. So the phenomenal, to something you can see, hear, smell, or taste, as well as to objects of thoughts or ideas. Whatever can be introduced into a concept is G, relative. Something that is beyond our thinking, the noumenal, is ri. And I looked up that word noumenal. I can't give you the definition off the top of my head because it would have, I was going to go in a different direction with this, but that word noumenal and phenomenal, I think those were helpful to look up. So light is relative. This is like light illuminates the distinctions. In dark, we don't see distinctions. In the light, we can see distinctions, separation, it appears that way. And so we have a tendency when we hear a passage like this to turn light, relative, and absolute into something particular. So when we hear the two truths, at first, commonly, we think of light, relative, as being something particular. We think of absolute as being something particular as well. And we might think, well, relative is bad. I want to get rid of the relative and I want to run to the absolute. So there's a separation that occurs in our minds when we first encounter these teachings. And I'll say this in a little bit, but when Suzuki uses G and ri, he's trying to get to the more subtle aspect of what's actually being pointed out here. So actually, light and dark are standards within our own minds. So these aren't separate. Nevertheless, we have to say something. So again, light and dark are standards within our own minds. An example that was used in branching streams flow in the darkness, I thought was pretty good. He does a slightly different variation of this, but if you've been in the sun all day and you come into this room, you know, it's probably going to look dim. It's going to look dark. So there's going to have a dark aspect to it. Conversely, if you're coming to this room from a cave, you know, if you've spent a week in a cave, for example, and you come to this room, it's going to seem really bright, you know. And so this light and dark, it isn't as clear as we commonly think it is. And so because we have some standard, we say it's light, this room's light, or this room is dark. But actually, light and darkness, light is darkness and darkness is light. These things are inseparable. So we can't pull them apart. So what he's saying here is light is darkness and darkness is light. The relative is absolute, the absolute is relative. They're not two. So again, Suzuki uses the words ji and ri to point out the subtlety in translation from Japanese to English. He uses another example where light and dark is like the relationship between skin and myself. So if I were to say, I have my skin, you know, it would sound weird, you know, and what he's pointed out is that in Japanese, like it has a different feel to it. It has like a different, I don't know the right word to use, but it's not as distinct as it sounds in English. So if I say I have my skin or I have my hand, that would sound weird because it's obviously a part of me. So when he's saying light and dark, these don't have the distinction that it commonly does in our English language. So your skin and hand are a part of you. It's actually not dualistic. What he's saying is light and dark, the way it's coming across, it's not dualistic. So light and darkness or nighttime and daytime are opposite each other, but yet they're always together. So there's no separation. Ultimate reality is not barren or stagnant, but full of life. Without any arising or perishing, it gives birth to the phenomenal beings that appear to be arising and perishing, being born and dying. Right, so are you guys tracking me so far? Or I feel like I might be talking nonsense or something. All right. So there are male stones, female stones, and stones neither male nor female. They repair heaven and they repair earth. There are stones of heaven and there are stones of earth. Though this is said in the secular world, it is rarely understood. We should understand the reason behind this giving birth to a child. So here, these are quotes from Chinese classics about stones having gender, life, and functions. I'm not going to go into the heaven and earth, all that stuff. What did occur to me is that giving birth, you know, this passage talks about giving birth. I don't really like that. You know, that seems weird to me, and I thought about that quite a bit. And it just seemed like giving birth is potentially a problematic way to put it. However, I've come, farther in my understanding, I think. So it's fine. It's fine. But something, usually when we think of birth, or at least my mind goes to something coming from nothing. Something comes into existence. So it's this whole way of understanding from like a usual understanding perspective, is that something is born, it comes into existence. Well, this whole framework it completely misses the mark. When we think of something as existing, we think of it as persistence. So if something is born, something gave it birth and it comes into existence, and then it persists for a while and then passes away. Well, it's all just one mind. It's all just this totality, reality with a capital R. So how can something come into existence? It doesn't really work. But I think as long as we can understand that these are the appearances, it appears that way. So it appears to come into birth. It appears to go out of existence. And this is a manifestation of mind, and this is consciousness. And so it appears that way. It's a functioning of mind, capital M, mind. And it appears that way, but it isn't quite what's going on. It doesn't capture actually what's going on. So at the time of birth, our parent and child transform together. We should not only study that birth is realized in the child becoming the parent, we should also study and fully understand that the practice and verification of birth is realized when the parent becomes the child. So there are a few different ways to look at this. And so there is the process of our practice. And this is where we grow. We start out as a baby when we first start to practice. We receive help from our teachers, from co-practitioners, and from other people, from the text, the literature. So all these things are helpful. And then after a while, maybe we start to mature. Our understanding starts to deepen. And then we become parents. And this is where there's parental mind, and it's taking care of all beings. The separation that we once believed in, has we can see through that and start to help other people on this journey. And so the way that he puts it in the text is giving birth to something in students. So after a while, when the practice matures, we become parents and we're able to help other people, and we give birth to something in students. Well, I'll talk about this in a little bit towards the end of my talk, but there's actually nothing to give, So again, I don't know if giving birth is necessarily, if it hits the mark, but if we're not confused by that giving birth, or we actually understand what's being pointed out, okay, but there's nothing to actually give. And so this giving birth, this is pointing to truth or reality with a capital T and a capital R, which is always right here and right now. So again, there's nothing to give. It's just pointing to reality as it is right now. And this is what our teachers do, by the way. They point. They're pointing to what's happening. And again, at the beginning of this talk, that's why it's so helpful to have our common understanding tested a little bit, because we need to be able to see through our usual understanding. So another way to look at this is he's also talking about each step of our practice as being a Dharma position. A parent appears in each moment. This is much like the example that Steve Hagen used to use, which is a pedestrian. When is a pedestrian a pedestrian? When there's somebody sitting on a chair, is that a pedestrian? A pedestrian is only a pedestrian in the moment that they're a pedestrian. And this goes with all things. A teacher. When is a teacher a teacher, and when is a student? Well, even in a classroom, which I just started teaching, by the way, I can tell you, I'm not always the teacher. I'm learning. And so that teacher-student relationship is interchangeable. One moment I can be the teacher, the next moment I can be the student. And so these are fleeting identities that don't have substantiality to it. And this can go for anything that you can think of. Even my name, Beau, my identity. What is that? What exactly am I saying when I'm Beau Elkington? Is that something particular? Is that capturing actual reality? Well, if we can see that, like, no, it doesn't. I honestly don't know what that is referring to. It's a weird thing, but it's really true that we cannot pin down anything. There's nothing that we can pin down. So parent also becomes a child, newly born in each step. So each step, the parent can become a child. Each Dharma position is an intersection of phenomenal beings and eternal Buddha. Beyond time and space, this is light and dark. So we're always, I think Norm always used to say this, we're always at the intersection of relative and absolute. We're always at this intersection. So a Dharma position appears independent. So a moment appears to be independent. It appears to be separate, distinct, and yet is simultaneously of the whole. And I appreciate the research that I needed to do for this talk, because I have a much better understanding of that phrase Dharma position, And I think what Dogen was trying to do is loosen, how we commonly think of things in relation to time. So when we commonly think of things, it's separate, independent, and distinct, and it doesn't point to the whole. But if we say that the cushion, that's at the Dharma position of cushion, what this is doing is it's saying, yeah, we can say it appears to be a cushion, but it's not separate from the whole. And so the Dharma position is saying it's that intersection of relative and absolute. So another way of looking at this is that discontinuity and continuity interpenetrate each other. As Dogen discusses in Genjo Koan, the moment when firewood dwells in the Dharma position of firewood is a perfect moment. The before and after of the moment is cut off, and both past and future are reflected in that moment. The next moment is the same. Each moment is an absolute and independent moment, is discontinuous and disconnected like a stone woman. And yet, the stone woman gives birth. The discontinuous moment brings about the next moment. So again, this is the intersection of relative light and absolute darkness, intersection of Ji and Ri. So firewood is a manifestation of mind. This is consciousness. And so we see firewood, and it's an appearance. It appears that way, and it lacks substantiality. Our common view on this is that it's something substantial, particular, but the firewood is just a manifestation of mind. So these manifestations of mind with a capital M appear to have a past and a future. So it appears that way. And time is conceptual. It's illusory. And so once we think something has a past and a future, where is that occurring? That's occurring in our mind, in our mind. And you can't ever experience the past except for right now. You can't ever experience the future except for right now. And this is easily seen. If we just look at this and we think about the future, well, where is the future? It's always now. It's always right now. And this is outside of time. But it can seem that way. It can appear that way. So the before and after of firewood is cut off because it's always now. And this is outside of time. This is wholeness. This is totality. This is now. And Steve Hagen would italicize this now. And so this isn't time. When we say past and future, that's having to do with time. It's conceptual. But when we say it's now, this is reality, totality. And this isn't, it's not. So the Dharma position of firewood is complete and total. It's not negating the appearances of time. It's not negating the past and the future. And it's not negating now. So this is the coming together, which was never separate to begin with. And so each moment is fresh, new, and completely, or totally complete. I was going to say completely total, but totally complete. Each moment is fresh, new, and of the whole, it's total. So this is not only about parent and child, but also about Dharma transmission. And this is my favorite part of this passage, by the way, because when I first read this, that's kind of where my mind went, is like, it seemed like it was kind of talking about teacher and student, the transmission process, like what's being transmitted. And so I thought it was interesting from that perspective. So each teacher appears to be completely independent from every other and has their own individual practice for themselves. So the teachers appear to be separate. They have their own practice. They do what they do. So they appear separate. Uchiyama Roshi, I'm going to say a bad word here in a second. So sorry for this, but it's Uchiyama Roshi. He said at one point, we cannot exchange even a fart with others, you know. And so if we think about that, the way it commonly appears that we're separate and distinct, we can't exchange anything with somebody else. We just can't, we can't do it. So how then is the Dharma transmitted? It goes on, yet the stone woman gives birth to a child stone. So we can't exchange anything. So how is it that the Dharma is transmitted from one teacher to a student? The child stone receives transmission from the stone woman. I think the not the best, but a really helpful way that I've heard this process occur was in Okamura's way that he described what he received from his teacher. And this has, for whatever reason, this has a lot of, it's impactful to me. So here's Okamura talking about what he received from his teacher, Uchiyama. I found out who I am by studying with my teacher. That's transmission. I didn't actually receive anything, but I found out that I am one with all beings. That was what he taught me by his way of life. And so he's saying he didn't actually receive anything from his teacher. But what he taught him by was his way of life, the way that he lived, the way that he practiced had a profound impact on him. And this is the way the relationship with teacher and student tends to go. We don't receive anything from our teachers, you know, which is frustrating. You know, it's frustrating, especially at first, because I'll just speak for myself. The way that I was approaching this was usual. I wanted to go to a teacher to teach me what I needed to know in order to get the thing. And this is very usual. This is, I wanted to pass the test. Tell me the information I need in order to pass the test. Well, over time, you know, the teacher was just pointing out my own confusion. And so ultimately it was just pointing and looking at my own mind and how I was confused and the way that our teachers live their lives. They practice, and it's little moments, and I've given enough throughout the years that I won't bore you with that stuff, but it's just the small ways that our teachers live their lives, not intentional, not like they're trying to teach us anything, but just the way that they live. Very impactful. I got through this much quicker than I thought I was going to be honest. There's one more section that I was going to use as kind of a, if I could get to it, I was going to use it. But it was, I think it's a beautiful image. To me, this is just beautiful. And I didn't quite comprehend what it was saying to begin with, because there's a little translation thing going on there. But it says, a frog on the ocean bottom eats gruel. The jeweled rabbit in the heaven washes the bowl. And so this comes from this saying, a frog in a well, which commonly means limited views. A frog in a well can't see much. It just has a very limited view. It's in a well, so it can probably only see up, if that, So just having limited views, I think this is a common phrase used in other cultures. The frog in this passage is us. So we have limited views. The ocean, this is the Sangha, a boundless place to practice. As we know, Sangha isn't limited. Sangha is ultimately reality. This is a place to practice. Eating gruel, this is our practice. And the jeweled rabbit is truth, thus reality with a capital R. And so the frog is just a tiny creature within a vast place eating gruel or practicing. So the parent truth gives birth to the child, which is our practice right here and now. And at the same time, child gives birth to the truth being revealed, truth with a capital T. The frog and the rabbit are inseparable, and it's just one mind. So again, a frog on the ocean bottom eats gruel. The jeweled rabbit in the heaven washes the bowl. So while we're practicing, there's also the rabbit in the heaven washing the bowl. So this is just a nice image of like almost relative and absolute. It's like we're always being supported. We're always here. We're never inseparable from reality, from truth with a capital T. These things are never separate. And that's why it's like a pointing to who we actually are to begin with. So the teacher doesn't give us anything. The teacher is just pointing out who we actually are, what we actually are. And it's nothing particular. It's inseparable from wholeness. It was never separate to begin with. And so it's like going searching for something that's already in our pocket. We already have it. And it's not that we have it because it's not something to have. It's like, it reminds me of that you are not it, it is you. It's like this is reality, totality. We're never apart from it. But nevertheless, it's helpful to have teachers that can point out to us what this is, because we get confused. It's so easy to get pulled into things. It's so easy to get pulled by our emotions, by our discriminating mind, believing things to be ultimately true and real when they're just relative truths. All right. Well, I actually did spend quite a bit of time preparing for this. So maybe the shorter talk today was a product of that, but this was, there's a lot to this, there's more to that paragraph than meets the eye. Again, I really appreciate the transmission part of it. The stone woman gives birth to a child in the night. Again, the stone woman, isn't confused, is not caught by delusion, gives birth to a child, conveying this to pointing out what this is. And the night, this is just reality, absolute, no distinctions. So what is that? Very, very interesting. Any questions? Yeah.
If you're a mother and you meet your child and you think you're going to you think you know what's going on, you're in serious trouble. They are going to teach you everything you
Yeah.
need to. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And if you don't listen to them, good luck. So, yeah, it really does. Yeah, from the very moment.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Nancy, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting how we think we know things, and then we don't know much ultimately. And a child is, a great teacher. I, as a lot of you probably know, I have a, almost 3-year-old daughter, and a lot of my ways of doing things had to go out the window, because I can't control her. I can try to help point out certain things that are helpful, but ultimately it's just like I'm kind of at her mercy. Yeah. Anything else?
Could you talk just a little bit more about emotion? Because it felt like at one point, like you were saying that basically equating emotion with delusion. But I'm not sure that's what you were saying. That doesn't quite ring true to me, because it seems like emotions are telling us things. They do provide insights, in different ways.
Mhm.
So could you clarify or just speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah. So I use CBT at my work, right? And I like CBT because it's the most probably helpful for me to be able to play with, in a way, and talk about these things. I mean, I'm not saying that the model is 100% accurate, but it's just helpful to get in that arena with somebody to actually try to point out some things that are helpful. In that model, it's like thinking leads to emotions, and so basically, if we're having a thought or we're thinking about something in a certain way, that thought, that way of capturing reality or conceptualizing the experience is, as we know from practice, is off from the beginning. It's always off. But in like a therapy setting, this can be pointed out, relatively speaking, like that patient might be having an inaccurate interpretation of the experience. I'm going to give you an example, and I think I've used this before, that if I'm walking down the street and I see Ron, and all of a sudden I say, hey, Ron, how's it going? Ron just keeps walking right past me. He doesn't say hi or anything. And I'm just like, what the heck? What's going on with Ron? Is he mad at me or something? Or is there something wrong with me? Something wrong with him? So I'm going to spin out and create all these stories based on that experience. I'm going to have an emotional experience based on that. Well, then if I turn back around and see that Ron actually had AirPods in his ears, and he was looking down at the ground, he never saw me or heard me to begin with, all of that stuff was created of nothing, but I'm having an emotional experience, and emotions, there's thoughts, but emotions seem to have more weight. It's like they're more impactful in a way. There's like a physical, experience with the emotion. So if I'm feeling really sad or angry or frustrated, I'm going to feel like I needed to do something to rectify the situation, and I'm going to take actions based on that. Well, a lot of that can be cleared up by realizing that he never saw me or heard me to begin with. So actually seeing what the moment was instead of the stories I was creating out of it. So I don't know if that helps answer the question, but it's like, I don't know. I'm not saying emotions necessarily are delusion, but it's almost like emotions are it's a part of the experience,
Sure. I mean, because that's kind of a silly example to say, but say that did happen. Say there was something wrong. Ron really did need to blow you off or whatever. I mean, you might not have it wrong. You might not have it that wrong, right? And then
Yeah.
the emotion, or maybe it's like more of an injustice, right? That
Yeah.
you're seeing it, that injustice somewhat more clearly. And so you have anger and there's more righteous, that kind of, so I guess I'm just thinking there are examples where maybe I don't know, there's always limitations to our conceptualizations, right? But
For
it's
sure.
not always that off, I guess, right? Where emotions might be telling us something that's important, right? Or
Yeah,
a helpful piece of insight kind of thing.
maybe. Maybe, because there's layers to this. So there's also like, in that, whenever we interpret, like you just said, yeah, we're interpreting, the experience. We're also, Ron is a specific being. Sorry to pick on you, Ron. So there's something particular called Ron, and as we know, this is part of our delusion, that we think something is particular or a certain way. So there's the whole massive delusion that occurs almost like at once. It's either delusion or it's not delusion. When we're deluded, we're buying into, we're believing that to be real and true, and not just Ron and the story that's happening in the moment, but the basis of reality, substantiality. And so it's me being impacted by something out there. And that whole framework is a delusion. The emotional experience, emotions like discrimination, that still occurs. The relative world doesn't go away. When we can see what this is, it's still, but we're just not confused by it. And I think in that way, the emotional experience can become, I once used this word, cleaner. It's cleaner. I once heard, I think it was Steve Hagen, talking about his teacher, that emotions are like beans. They come, where they might stay for a while and then they go. They're just, but there's nothing substantial to them. And yeah, you're right. They might be telling us something that we need to know about our experience, and we should listen to that. But at the same time, it might be that it's not an entirely accurate emotion based on what the actual experience is. So I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with me. There you go. I got sort of distracted from the beginning of your talk, because this is just a general comment, because my mind started to go to this question, well, where could I find a place to hang out with a room full of puppies for a while? So there you go. Which brings us, I guess, to the emotion of joy. And think about a room full of puppies somehow, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Anything else? Are you sure I answered your question adequately? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I honestly, this comes up sometimes, quite frequently, more frequently than I would have expected in the work that I do, and it's like that distinction between thoughts and feelings, and what you were saying, feelings and delusion. It's like that can be a subtle thing, and Norm, help me out. I'm sorry, Norm. I wasn't going to do this, but when I was preparing for this talk, it's like I went in and asked Norm some technical question about what I was going to be talking about today, and per usual, Norm just cut straight to the heart of the matter, and he's just like, whenever we see things as separate, particular, it's like coming back to wholeness, totality, so it's like, yeah, there's a lot of, nice images and language and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's always just this, it's always just now, and we're never apart from reality with a capital R. It's always wholeness, it's always totality. And if there's an emotional experience that's occurring right now, you know, just by not turning that into something particular is gonna, you know, that's freedom. There can be a freedom right in the middle of that, you know, and that's what these teachings are always pointing to. So that's what you helped me out with, Norm, is not getting caught by language, you know, concepts, and just always coming back to just this right now. And right here, right now, there's no separation, you know, between anything. Nothing particular. There's nothing particular. This is all beings, including emotions, you know. And if we're not confused by the emotions, you know, it's like they're just it's emotions. It's nothing particular, and it just comes and it goes, you know. All right. Anything else? Yeah.
Nathan has a comment or a question. Nathan, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on what was said about emotions, and I guess the question of, you know, what if we did get it right? What if they really were angry at us? A good way that I've heard this phrased in the past is that, you know, the realm of thought or language, you know, spoken or thought, just can never really touch reality. But it's a spectrum. It's like some thoughts are more true than other thoughts, and some thoughts are just way, way out there. So we can come close to reality with our thoughts and our perceptions, but we can never quite touch it because we're always kind of filtering it through our own lens. And so they may actually be angry at us. We may have gotten it right, but we still can't ever get into that person's head and see how they experience that. And so it's never quite accurate. It's always a little bit off, even if we've kind of come closer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, we can get close to reality with the thought. I don't know. I think that might be a little bit off. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with it for the most part, but we don't have to get close to reality because it's always just reality. It's always just this. It's always wholeness. So we don't have to get close, you know. And that's part of the problem with language conceptual experience, is that we think we you know, can get somewhere with that. But it's always just this. So there's no need to say anything about it, actually. But I do, you know, agree with you that we can get close to it with, and I'm sorry, we can get close to it, back to the Ron example, but it's like, yeah, he might have been mad at us to begin with, and that might be an accurate relative truth, you know. However, you know, why was he mad to begin with? Was he confused about something? You know, so there might be a whole gamut of confusion occurring there. So I don't know. It's always a little bit off the mark, no matter how much we try to pin down what is real and what's not real, because we don't have to pin it down. It's always just reality with a capital R. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.